Hi, it's Lee, and welcome to the Tesla Economist. Now, GM got their man in office to push through the inflationary Inflation Reduction Act to give them somewhat of a more even playing field against Tesla, or at least that's what they can portray the illusion of to their stockholders. That old Wall Street saying of, I'll be gone, you'll be gone, suddenly seems apt right now. On top of that, though, look how ridiculously high Tesla's prices have become. It can't be too hard for GM to undercut these now. Hey, they're even advertising the price of their luxurious Cadillac for less than a Model Y. Although it is a rear-wheel drive with 20 miles less range, they aren't ready to publish their all-wheel drive estimated range just yet. Oh, and the biggest joke is that this is with an 100 kilowatt-hour battery compared to Tesla's 80 kilowatt-hour. Yes, it would appear GM really are that bad at this. But who wants a Tesla when they can have a Cadillac? GM might be thinking perhaps. Although it's unlikely that the consumers will still be thinking that. I thought Cadillacs were more for the generation before baby boomers. That market tends to be dwindling. And some of them can't even drive anymore, which may mean they need self-driving Teslas anyway. Oh no. Another angle where I see legacy struggling. So we have this little car company in the US that actually happens to have the car factory that produces more cars than any other facility in the whole of North America. But they just have that one, or did until they built the largest factory in the world in Texas just recently, which will likely have an even higher output, at least eventually when they get all their ducks in a row. In addition to that, we are about to receive an announcement of the next giga location, and everyone's money seems to be on North America. And I think we've narrowed it down to somewhere like Ohio, Quebec, or Ontario, which all serve a massive population. Elon says each factory is going to be capable of around 1.5 to 2 million units capacity a year. Well, Texas might even be more than that, given it's quite large. And then this next one, well, it's serving an even larger population, so it might also be of reasonably large size too. Some quick numbers: Fremont, Texas, and this Northeast American location, we're around 5 million vehicles a year. Let's keep with easy numbers and say that the US sell about 15 million vehicles a year. Now, last year, Tesla didn't really make that much of a dent in that. Perhaps about 500,000 or so vehicles sold in the US, maybe 3% market share. So the legacy auto sales in the US were not overly affected by Tesla's sales, and the COVID issues had far more impact on the fluctuation for them. So they're still standing and still selling and still profiting. But what happens when Tesla goes from 500,000 to tenfold up to 5 million sales? Perhaps by around 2025 or so, when these factories are ramped. And that's if we don't factor in any major expansion in Texas or additional factories in North America, aside from this new one. Anyway, now our 15 million US vehicle sales a year with 3% Tesla market share has expanded to 1/3 market share, meaning that Legacy now sell 5 million fewer vehicles in the US. Assuming the new car market is zero-sum game, people say Teslas are too expensive and part of the luxury car market and compare them to other cars for sale of similar price. Although remember, the Model 3 rear-wheel drive does have a starting price of around the average selling price in the US before subsidies. But in my opinion, a more accurate representation is to see what vehicles people are trading in order to purchase a Tesla. And it seems to be fairly across the board. We have Toyotas and Hondas, as well as BMWs and Chevrolets. In other words, I think it's only fair to assume somewhat that Tesla is a broad market vehicle that is not actually in a niche or particular market segment, aside from of course it being electric, which will likely become mainstream over time anyway. But it's not a high-end luxury brand, despite what a lot of people say, just by judging the price. So across the board, Legacy are losing perhaps 30% of their sales, which means they would have to wind down about 30% of their production. Therefore, GM and all other legacy autos in the US would have to close certain lines and only keep their most profitable or the least losing lines remaining. But remember, we know all about economies of scale, and when you start selling fewer vehicles, then the likes of OPEX suddenly become more expensive per vehicle. 30% fewer vehicles with the same OPEX actually increases OPEX 43% more per vehicle. Ouch, that's quite an addition, especially when it was likely these models were not making any considerable profit before and are now making a loss, like their electric cars. Seriously though, this is really tough. The market is not big enough for them all. Just this minor drop would destroy them. You know what? It actually did destroy GM last time. In the global financial crisis, around 2009 car sales did drop 30% and GM went bankrupt and had to be bailed out. And then when the car market picked up again, they were back to making a profit. But how do you bail out a company that has lost market share forever and not going to pick up again? In fact, the opposite, as Tesla might plan on ramping up even more and taking more of this market share. It's musical chairs. The music has stopped playing and GM doesn't have a chair. And by the looks of GM's attempt at electric, they're coming up too short. But am I being overly critical of GM and ignoring Ford? Is it that I have a disdain for people who can lie so easily, like Mary Barra? Or perhaps I don't mind Jim Farley as much because his cousin was Chris Farley? Or perhaps because the taxpayers already had to bail out GM and they didn't even repay it all, despite making massive profits later. And not only would a bailout not be able to help them this time, as this is the end of their industry, they've already had it. They got a pre-bailout called the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm not sure if Congress is going to be able to pass a bailout on top of that, especially by this stage considering how much this is now costing. Tesla alone at around 5 million vehicles a year, plus batteries and everything else, has to be close to about $50 billion just for them. But the real question is, who will go into first? GM or Ford? Ford does have more debt, but this is collateralized by their ICE cars they've sold. If their customers keep making their payments, then Ford should out-survive GM, although with some massive downsizing themselves, possibly leaving the F-150 and a few other brands, assuming Cybertruck hasn't also taken out the F-150. I think, to be honest, Ford will also be hanging by a thread, and rather than being bailed out themselves, perhaps they'll be forced to purchase or merge with GM for cents on the dollar. But then they can consolidate, and perhaps Ford's OPEX can now cover both companies. I would say there is a chance their sports cars, Mustang, Camaro, Corvette, perhaps the Charger, may still have a chance, due to Tesla not competing with two-door coupes, but they may drop some lines. The Cadillac brand could have had a chance, as it could have gotten away with a higher price tag. The Lyric specs are just so poor though, it's hard to say. But between Ford and GM, there are so many models, they'll have to cut back dramatically. Either way, there'd be a lot of downsizing. In reality, the only thing of much use to Ford is really GM's battery factories. GM are investing over $7 billion into battery factories with LG, so Ford will essentially have access to these now in this scenario. Supposedly enough EVs for 1 million vehicles a year, on top of Ford's plan to have enough factories for 2 million electric vehicles a year of their own. It might even be the markets that are the most profitable for Ford and GM that they've actually cut back on, pickup trucks and crossovers, because Tesla will be competing so hard with the Cybertruck and Model Y. So they may only be able to offer ICE in these segments that Tesla is not competing on. In fact, there's a high possibility that they may have also converted all these ICE sales into hybrid by that stage too, to take advantage of the $7,500 tax credit, which they will need, as they may now need to raise their prices by about that much to cover the additional OPEX per vehicle cost. So by around 2026, with 3 million EV sales from this Ford company, 5 million sales a year from Tesla, we're at 8 million electric vehicles a year. That's still only half the US market. There may be another million EV sales from other companies like Stellantis and some of the Germans, perhaps the Koreans, then perhaps some hybrid sales from Toyota, and then some ICE and hybrid sales from the remaining. But all their ICE sales are dwindling, which is hurting their economies of scale and profits, so they would possibly have to raise prices. This would also mean that there is no need for Tesla to start reducing their prices yet in order to increase demand. As I keep saying, it's more likely the market gets their heads around vehicles will simply cost more in the future, at least near future, as we go through this transition. The EV bandwidth simply isn't big enough yet, and consumers will need to make sacrifices elsewhere. But I also try to explain that Teslas are still good value, and a $50,000 Tesla is a similar cost of ownership to a $25,000 ICE car. It just requires a different paradigm shift of purchase decision, or even some education. I still get people commenting that Teslas are too expensive at $75,000. This should also mean that Teslas will continue to hold their price. There are possibly some Chinese EVs out there too, but I still can't see them making it big in the US. I have to stick with the data and numbers on that, despite what others say. So in this scenario, Ford would now be a parent company to various US brands and have a large amount of sales. They will likely use their similar strategy they always have. Lots of different models in lots of different segments to find niches, but no longer have to worry about GM as a competitor, so will have a larger market share available, depending on what Tesla leaves them. They will also be receiving massive subsidies, and I can't see the government removing that for them, as they do need it. The government may end up placing a cap like 10 million sales per manufacturer, in other words, removing Tesla subsidies. This would not surprise me at all. 10 million sales may be enough time for Ford to finally become profitable and perhaps reach up to 5 million sales a year, which may take them closer to the end of the decade to reach. Meanwhile, there is a smaller and smaller market share left as Tesla would continue to ramp up and offer more vehicles in more segments, like vans, SUVs, and compacts. To be honest, 3 million might be about all this Ford company can reach. There simply might not be enough market share left for them. If Ford eventually sold only EVs and it was capped at the 3 million a year, with an ASP of $50,000 and gross margin of 25%, total gross profit would be $37.5 billion. That would even be enough profit to likely cover their OPEX, even for Ford, and leave a reasonable profit. They would still have a likely profitable ICE parts business too, perhaps. But how can they reach 25% gross margin? I think they would need to remove the car dealer network to reach those margins. It's like a catch-22 though, because if Ford go under, then their car dealers can't sell any new Fords, and Ford may only survive if the car dealers no longer take a commission. Maybe they need to have an honest chat with the dealers and come to a compromise. Perhaps they end up selling all their ICE parts at cost to the dealers so they get more profit on those, just as an example. There was also talk about Ford Electric being a new business that may not be constrained by dealers. The dealers will have to offer new services like maintaining the electric cars, but also the ICE maintenance business too, then used cars. Some dealerships will go under, others not, but there'll be fewer types of EVs to manage compared to multiple brands of ICE. So perhaps there'll be enough supply and demand. For Ford to hit these margins, they'd also need to get rid of unions too, or cut back at least. The electric factories could be built in states that are less union friendly, and likely manufacture them in Mexico. Anyway, this is just one idea of how this may play. I think Ford have a better chance than GM. Their electric offering is vastly superior. It feels like GM are just trying to convince the shareholders rather than save the actual company. If GM goes down, it does free up a lot more market share potential for Ford. GM do have a large cell factory that would likely be of interest to Ford, and the government may force Ford to acquire it, especially if Ford are also looking like they're about to go under too. In any event, I don't really see much hope for GM. Now, this may be the end of GM, and Ford may benefit, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Ford won't also go out of business too. In reality, no one can predict where this industry will end up by about 2030. It just doesn't look good for GM. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.